Good evening, good evening, good evening. Welcome to another transformative conversation with Sameon. And I am Sameon. Give me a moment. Let me take this backdrop off real quick so you can see my face. Hey, how we doing this evening? How we doing? I need to go get my glasses. I forgot my glasses. We're getting a little bit older, so in that space, we have to be prepared for all situations. And one of the situations that I have to be prepared for is the ability to see. The ability to see. I'm glad you've joined us today, and we're available. We're broadcasting live from Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. We had Instagram. We've had some technical difficulties with it, but we'll have it fixed next week. But we're going to have an interesting conversation. And this conversation actually derived from a conversation I was having with a gentleman earlier, good guy, salt of the earth. And we just had to catch up. And I said to him, he said, "What are you up to these days?" And I told him about what's been going on and these conversations that we've been having on Wednesday nights called the Transformative Conversations, which derive from prior conversations where people said, man, if individuals could just be flies on the wall of our conversations, it could benefit them so much. They could receive so much from it. And so we were just having a conversation, which is what I desire to do every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I know we started at 8:30, blame it on me. I had to take a nap. Getting up at 5 a.m. in the mornings, Eastern Standard Time, every morning, I needed to take a nap this morning. So we had this conversation. And one of the vital things that came out of it is a simple question. We were talking about our children. And I know many of you can relate to this conversation. We were discussing our children, and we were having a conversation about how to parent our 21st century children. And the difference from when we were growing up in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, some of y'all in the 2000s, but specifically in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. How we were raised and the details, the way that our parents showed up for us. And, it seemed like we were a tougher generation. And I don't really like to use that word, tougher or softer, but yet it's something that is being discussed. So we want to have that conversation, and I'm opening the lines up for you to come in. I'm gonna put it in the chat for you to come on in. You don't have to show your face. Just have a conversation. But I want to talk about this. I'm going to drop a link in the chat. You can just click the link and you can come in and have this discussion with me about how to parent our children in the 21st century. And are we living in a softer society? Are we living in a softer society? And so, but please, before we go any further, let's like, share, and subscribe. Let's like, share, and subscribe, and comment from wherever you are. Just please stop, take a moment, come out the chat, like the stream. Greatly appreciate it. It helps the algorithm, helps other people be available to this conversation and this type of content. We greatly appreciate that. You can check us out all on all the social media avenues, Twitter, not Twitter, but Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook at One Transformation Center. One Transformation Center. So these kids, they're coming here differently, right? I'm sure many of you can agree with that. They're coming here differently. The reason we say they're coming here differently is because they're not like any kids that we have. They weren't like us. They weren't like any other generation. They're coming here smarter, faster. They're adapting to things quicker. And they're having more access to information at a greater rate than we ever did. They're trying to understand, trying to obtain emotional intelligence, even though their brains aren't fully formed. And so, but we're expecting them, we're holding them to a sense of this high level of expectation that they should adapt to it very quickly. But the reality is they're not. They're not. They're struggling. So we want to have a conversation about this. First and foremost, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Sameon Crumby, and I am the leader and transformers. I'm the transformation. Can I speak this evening? Transformation leader and founder of One Transformation Center. We're having these conversations. Our focus is on transforming lives and relationships through inspiration, motivation, and healing. Transforming lives and relationships, families, through inspiration, motivation, and healing. So let's have a conversation. I said I was gonna drop the chat and I forgot. Let's drop this chat in here. If you go to the chat room, you'll see there is a link that you can click that will allow you to be able to come on and have this conversation. Again, you do not have to be on video. You do not have to show your face. Just we welcome the opportunity for you to lend your perspective. Maybe you're raising children in this time period, or maybe you're a grandparent, or maybe you're a child who was witnessing or has witnessed the transformation in that relationship and has some inputs on how you feel that we could be better parents. We can be better parents. Or maybe you want to contribute to the idea of this idea that we're living in the potential of living in a softer generation. Again, not my words. This is the language that's being used. I have some contributions to make to this conversation myself, and we'll get to that in just due time. So let's talk. Let's talk about our children. And in full transparency, uh, I've raised children in two different generations. Actually, I've raised children in three different generations. By being the oldest of 10, and I had the privilege of, well, some wouldn't call it a privilege, and at times I didn't think it was a privilege, but I had the opportunity to understand my own generation by helping my mother raise my siblings. I was the oldest of 10, as I stated before, 8 girls and 2 boys. In addition to that, after that, I've helped other people raise their children. I've had input in other people raising their children and creating more vital relationships and more vital and viable relationships with their children. Throughout my dating experience, just through my relationships with friendships, I've made contributions with godchildren, being a godfather to many, just being a surrogate for others, and then raising my own children. I'm my oldest is 29, and then my oldest son is 29, oldest daughter is 23. Then I have two teenagers right now. So you have those two that are from the millennials on the cusp of this generation, and then you have this generation here, which is what Generation Z, and seeing the difference between them. And so the question I have for us is, how do we parent these children? How do we show up differently? It seems like these children have, and you can make a contribution in the chat as well. If you know anything about this, if you have any relations, if you have children, let's hit the number one. Hit the number one now. If you actually have children that you're raising in this current generation, hit the number one. Or maybe you're a grandparent. You have a different perspective because you're not so attached to it because they don't come home with you every day. You're raising them from a distance. You're not directly responsible for them, but you get to have access to them because of your relationship. Because we have some young grandparents today. I'm sure you've seen that. We have some young grandparents. That thing is infiltrating on all levels and all different level of social our society. No matter what your class is, no matter what your social economic background is or opportunities are, it's affecting you as well. So I'd like to get your perspective. Get your perspective. What do you see the main difference between our children now and before, whether you're using as a comparative to yourself as a child, or just comparison to others, using a comparison to yourself as a child, or comparison to raising children in the millennial generation, or raising children in this current generation? What do you see the biggest difference in that? I personally, as someone who's been in that role for 3 generations, one thing I see is that our children have exposure to far more information than we do. When we were growing up in the 70s and 80s, 90s, when we were growing up, and it really started to transition over in the 90s, our parents were there. Actually, I take that back. 80s and 90s, when you started really seeing the shift. Our parents were there. Most of us were raised in two-parent homes. Um, our parents were, our mothers usually stayed at home and their jobs were to raise the children. They were the domestic ones. They were ensuring that our children had the attention, their emotional needs were being met, their spiritual needs were being met. They were taking us to church. They were introducing us to life, giving us perspectives and parameters. We had rules. We were very disciplined. We were very disciplined. We rejected it a lot, but we were very disciplined. You spent more time outside than you did inside. You really was very social because of the relationships you built. You built relationships where it allowed you to travel around your neighborhood, where you got to know other families, where you experience other cultures. Uh, then, in addition to that, then you move into the 90s where you had more video games come out. And granted, we had video games in the 80s. We had Atari, and we had the beginnings of the Nintendo, but Sega and Nintendo really came out, and this showed up in PlayStation. All those things showed up, and our kids started being babysitted by television, babysitted by video games. Then we had mobile phones that became available in the 2000s. And we started giving our children the phone. So they had access to more electronics and more entertainment, and there was less hands-on parenting versus remote parenting. That was the biggest thing, right? Then we started seeing them being outside less, not wanting to be outside. We started seeing them to retract from being sociable. They weren't interested in getting to know other children. They weren't interested in getting to know anyone outside of their circle. There was this level of reclusiveness that occurred. We moved into this current generation. What I did see is that this current generation is one that does desire or like to be outside more. And so that they're working to engage more socially. And there's a stigma that really came front and center and really became more prominent in the 2000s, in the 2010 to 20 generation, and currently. And that stigma became autism. That identification became autism. More kids were placed on the spectrum. I have a child that was placed on the spectrum. Now, I'm not saying that they're any less than any other child because they're placed on the spectrum by any measure. Not at all. I'm not even saying that that's a disease or that's a disability by any measure. If you really get to know these children, they will blow your mind. They're exceptional. They're exceptional. The ability to overcome perceived limitations will really humble you, especially with all the limitations that we place upon ourselves. So we've seen that becoming front and center. We see learning, the stigmas of learning changing. There's the greater understanding that there's a differential in learning, so you can't teach every child in the same manner that they once did. They can't put all the children in one box and expect them to all get it at the same time. So there became a better understanding about that. Just a little brief of personal information. I was placed in special ed in the second grade, not because of a learning disability, but one that was perceived as behavioral. And because of that, it placed a stigma upon me that I was a troubled kid, or that I had some deficiencies, even in learning, even though I wasn't placed there because of learning disabilities. But what was not understood is I was bored. And because I was bored, I found the propensity to get involved with mess or to be a class clown, or to be lethargic and go to sleep in class and not be disinterested and be just disjointed. But I had the desire to move faster than my teacher was permitting and the adults understood, and then thirdly, than the other children in the classroom. However, because I was a minority, and I'm using that word for a specific reason, because I was a minority, I was not really understood. This general ideology that's created today, that's placed upon every child, despite their race, culture, their socioeconomic background, so on and so forth, that exists today, did not exist in my childhood. Now, we had teachers that cared; they took their time with you, but yet, if they did not understand you, they tried to label you and pawn you off into a space that could potentially be more understood and be more applicable to who you are. However, they were wrong. And I was in that space. I was in that space from eighth grade of second grade to 10th grade, sophomore year in high school. It wasn't until sophomore year of high school that I was able to test myself. I demanded to be tested and was able to test myself out of that. And at that time, they realized that, this kid he's not inept. As a matter of fact, he has a very high aptitude. And then I began to articulate or understand how to articulate the best way to help me to be successful. And when they began to listen to me, or when I found an institution or a school that began to listen to me and to put me in the right classes, you begin to see my grades shoot up from D's to F's, D's and F's to A's and B's. Not because I was in a lower learning environment, but simply because, or a label was placed upon me or put under any medication, but simply was I was challenged. I was challenged. And then I accepted the challenge. Most of our children are willing to accept the challenges when we spend the time to get to know them, to understand them. Now, many of us understood we came from a generation, and the generations prior to us came from a generation that had really two primary rules. One, spare the rod, spoil the child. Two, the child is to be heard, the child is to be seen and not heard. And three, do what I say, not what I do. Those are the three main rules of parenting when I was growing up. And I'm sure that's probably the same for you. Put a one in the chat if you can agree with, if you acknowledge that was also very prevalent in your childhood. Those three rules. One, spare the rod, spoil the child. Two, the child is to be heard, child is to be seen and not heard. Three, do what I do. Do what I say and not what I do. Do what I say and not what I do. Put a one in the chat if you can identify with those three rules being primary in your household at the time that you're growing up. Now, as time goes on and we become parents, we realize, one, that we begin to make adjustments and to fix what we feel like our parents did not understand. We begin to make the adjustments and treat our children and have different relationships with our children, give our children more parameters and listen to them. Some of us did. Some of us still hold on to those three rules because that was what was familiar to us. That was the template that was handed down and thought that was right. Some of us still continue to punish and not discipline. Let me explain that concept. Discipline is to correct. Punish is to beat. You're addressing a behavior and you're doing everything to change that behavior through physical punishment. Okay, I'm gonna use that word, punishment. Using corporal punishment to change a behavior. It's like a criminal. It's like somebody that be convicted of a crime and we place them and we punish them to many years in prison, to hard labor in order to correct their behaviors. When the reality is we need to change the behaviors. And you can attempt to change them through violence, because that's what it really is, if we're going to be honest about it. And I'm not a soft person. I'm not someone that who just believes I need to be coddled. No, I'm someone who was raised in being thrown in the fire, and you figure it out. You get your weight up, and you figure out the best way you can. And I succeeded in that space. So I'm not by any means someone that needed to be or desired to be coddled. Okay, but yet I do understand that everybody doesn't have the fortitude that I have. Everybody doesn't have the conviction that I have. And even though I have that conviction and that fortitude, doesn't mean that I'm right. Because often I'm wrong when I'm trying to connect with someone who doesn't even begin to understand that. And I'm wrong to think that they should understand it. Because we all operate from a different space, right? You know, there's an ideology says that which makes you that which doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Well, really, does it make you stronger? Because I see kids out here today that you say, well, they need more, they need to be beat more, they need more punishment, they need that belt more. Get them a switch. That'll correct their behaviors. Well, let me tell you from someone who received that treatment excessively. If it was not for my internal fortitude, if it was not for my convictions about being the best version of myself, if it was not for my understanding that I am an extension and reflection of the master creator, if it was not my understanding that I am a spiritual being having a human experience, I would be somebody that you would not want to deal with. Because that same pain that was bestowed upon me, I would want to bestow it upon others. You would take the innocence out of me and create a monster. Could have very easily been me. Yet I chose to do my work. I chose to align with the best version of myself. And I'm sure many of you can agree, you also had to make that decision yourself. And so, we have children out here who are being abused. Maybe not physically, but if you beat these kids physically, they're going to project it upon someone else. They're a different breed. But they're missing emotionally. They're feeling emotional abandonment. They're not even trying to hurt others as much anymore as they are trying to hurt themselves. If you look at the numbers, suicide rate has gone up significantly since the 70s, 80s, and the 90s. Let me see if I can pull some numbers up right quick. See if I can pull some numbers up. What was the suicide rate? What was the suicide rate amongst children? Let's see here. Suicide rate amongst children in the 90s. I usually would have this information prepared, but this just came to my mind. Oops, it didn't do it right. Okay, let's try this one more time. Suicide rate amongst children in the 90s. If any of you get this information before I do, go ahead and post it in the chat. All right, let's say suicide rates by age group, 1970s to 2002. This is by the National Institute of Health. What was the suicide rate in the 1990s? Let's see, it says. In the year 1990, it was 13.2 between 15 and 24. Let's see. Let's see here. Let's see here. Again, this is the NCBI health site. This is public health information. public knowledge. It says, give me a second, let me get down here to this chart. Annual suicide rates per 100,000 people by age group in the United States between 1970 to 2002. So in the year 1970, and excuse me, I don't have my glasses. So in the year 1970, between the ages of 15 and 24, it was 8.8 children per 100,000 children. 8.8 between 100,000 children that were committing suicide in the 70s. Now that continued to increase. Let's get to the 80s. Out of 100,000 children, 12.3 of them committed suicide. This is not the attempts. This is actually they actually fulfilled it. All right, that was the 90s. That's my generation of high school. All right, we get up to 2000. It comes down a bit. It starts to come down in 2000s to 10.2 for every 10 children for every 100,000 were committing suicide between the ages of 15 and 24. And I said children for a reason, because they're still children. They're still children. Let me go back. Let's look at some more information here. Let's see. Look at the CDC. CDC says overall during the study period, the national age-adjusted suicide rate increased by 30% from 10.4% per 100,000 in 2000 to 13.5 per 100,000 in 2020. 13.5 children per year per 100,000. Now, you say, well, 3 more kids. That's not a really big difference, is it? No. That's 3 more kids per 100,000. Do the math. We live in a city here in the Metro Atlanta area. There's like 5 million people here. There's 5 million people here. So of those children, you say probably two of those 5 million, say 2 million of them. So think about that. Just use a round number to say 1 million. So if you have 13.5 per 100,000, multiply that by 10 to get 1 million. That's 131 kids ending their lives per 1 million. So 131 kids who have decided to check out of here and who completed the attempt. This is just not attempts. This is who have decided to departure. Let's go deeper into this from the CDC. I actually probably should bring this on the screen. Let me see if I can just bring it on the screen and share the screen with you. Give me a second here. Let me see here. See if I can pull this up right quick. Let's see. Suicide rate in children. CDC. Oh, wow. Yeah, this thing is, we even gonna get to the disparities. We're gonna even get to the disparities. Hold on 1 second here. Let's see. See what we're gonna do. Let's see here. Let's see here. Here we go. Youth and young adults. Youth and young adults ages 10 to 24 years account for 14% of all suicides. The suicide rate for this age group is 10.5 per 100,000, was lower than any other age group. However, suicide is the third leading cause of death for young people, accounting for 6,643 deaths. For the youth ages 10 to 14, suicide is the second leading cause of death. Some groups of young people ages 10 to 24 most at risk for suicide include non-Hispanic, okay, with a suicide rate of 33% per 1,000. 33%, 33, not 33%, but 33 per 1,000. So 33 children per 1,000. Wow. It even goes on to say that sexual minority youth are also at an increased level. That means these children are trying to find love in a different way. Youth and young adults aged 10 to 24 have lower suicide rates, but they have higher 2019 rates of emergency department visits for self-harm. See, we've just been focusing on the completion. Let's talk about the harm. There's 342 and a half children per 100,000. Per every 100,000, a group of 100,000 kids, there's 343 of them on average that are admitted to ERs for self-harm. Wow. There was an estimate of 217,447 ER visits for self-harm amongst this younger age group. Girls and young women aged 10 to 24 are at particularly high risk with emergency department visits. 487.9 per 100,000, being twice the rate of visits among boys and young men, which are 203.3 per 100,000. This is from the CDC. This is from the CDC. So we have to understand, and a lot of this too was, and I think this is, if I'm not mistaken, this was the non-Hispanic American, Indian American, and Alaskan Natives. Okay, but we can go into this thing a little bit deeper. Let's go further up here. We can go by states too, if we need to. But so go back to the data, suicide data and statistics, because this is affecting our children. This is the next generation of people who are supposed to lead this country, who are supposed to make an impact, who are supposed to be assets, are leaving here. And why are they leaving here? Why are they leaving here? More times than none, it's because of parenting and how we're choosing to show up with our children. Many times we're proclaiming that they're living in a softer generation. This is a softer generation of children. They don't get it. So we parents are still being heavy-handed with them instead of making the adjustments to be of better support to them. We're standing in the space of thinking that we're right. They're wrong. They need to adjust to us. Like, how much clearer does it need to be for us that our children are being affected in a way, and what we're doing for them is not working? How we're showing up for them is not working. So I'm having this conversation earlier, and we're going to get back to the statistics as well. But I'm having this conversation earlier, and this conversation said, we didn't want to use the word softer to be, it isn't politically correct. It can be harming to many people. It can really create a space of deference. And the reality is, we have to learn how to speak life, man. We have to know how to speak life and understand that our words have power. And our words can produce some serious trauma. So we have to really be more cognizant of how we're showing up so that we can be assets and not liabilities as parents, as adults to this next generation, that we can truly support them. We can truly support them. So here we go. Here we go. Said, are we living in a softer society? Some would say so. I don't agree with that. I think we're living in a more heart-centric society. We're living in a more heart-centric society. Oops. Let me get this right. want to share with you this meaning. Let's go back to when I say heart centric. What I mean by heart centric is this: being heart centric means that we approach life. It's like also being heart centered, right? Heart centric to you, heart centric could be, oh, it's being more guided by our feelings. Let me come. I want to come back on the main screen here. Give me back to the main screen. We're more focused on our feelings, that we're talking about our feelings, and it's more expressive about our feelings and how we feel. Well, we grew up in a generation that feelings weren't discussed. We grew up in a generation where we didn't truly have understanding about who we are. It wasn't this communication. There was a significant communication gap between us as parents or adults and our children. So the question I have for you today is, are we living in a softened society, or are we as adults being required, being demanded to grow, to evolve, and to be more communicative, to be more in touch with our feelings, to be more vulnerable, so that we can grow to a higher intellectual, we can mature intellectually or higher emotional maturity? Are we being required to mature emotionally so that we can really be able to engage, really be able to support, really be able to usher these children to the next generation? Because they have access to far more information than we ever did. Imagine how easily it is for us as adults to become overwhelmed when there's a barrage of information coming to us at the same time. And we're being asked to process this all immediately. And we have developed minds, while our children do not. They're still developing their minds. In many cases, most of their minds are not even developed until the age of 24. But we have this expectation for them to get it because they have more access to information. So let me give you an idea. Let me give you a scenario. Let me give you a scenario. Would it be easier for you to have, well, let me back up. So let's say the question is posed to you: what would you like for dinner? What would you like for dinner? Dinner, a little Tyler Perry stuff, huh? Dinner. What would you like for dinner? But you're driving down this street full of restaurant options. I mean, it's just restaurant options galore. And the question is, what would you like for dinner? So in that moment, you're being asked to make a decision. In that moment, with the information that you have, how quickly are you going to process that? How quickly are you going to make that decision? And is it just really about the restaurants that you can eat at? Or are you also considering what everybody else in the car wants to eat as well? So you're processing a significant amount of information in that short period of time and expected to come up with the best and perfect answer. That's our children. That's our children. Yes, they have access to all this information so that they can get the knowledge and insight to be able to make the best decisions, to become informed. However, in that same time, they don't know what to do with the information. They don't know what is fake, what is real. They have no life experience to measure it by. None of that. And most of us parents, we're overwhelmed, and we don't even know how to share that with them. We don't know how to share that with them. We don't even know how to support or guide them in that space. Great comment. Great comment, Jamie. It says, we need to be more in tune with feelings as adults. With the conversation about mental health being so much on the forefront, it is important to understand what that means. Continuing, not only for us, but for our children and family as well. This is how we begin to rebuild families, to strengthen family. Family is so important. Family is the thing that can support you if you can't show up, if you can't be available and be what's necessary. Hey, Todd, it is you, huh? If you can't be available and show up for what that child needs at that moment in time, guess who? Somebody in your family can. Somebody in your family can. So great comment. Todd, I'm going to drop the link here if you want to come in, man, and have this conversation, because this is the gentleman that I was having the conversation with earlier who really inspired this topic this evening, because I didn't have anything I wanted to talk about yet. I was waiting for my download, and he shared this. Oh, this is perfect. This is perfect. Anyone that wants to come on the stream and have this conversation, you do not have to show your face, but we can talk. Let's have a conversation. That's what this platform is about on Wednesday nights, is having a conversation that can help us to transform from where we are to where we desire to be true assets, to be the best humans, to be the best expression of humanity in all capacities. Almost Blessing says, do you think that parenting style is different from those that were parents young than those that are older? Absolutely. Absolutely. I know we've all heard this idea that there's no manual. There's no manual for parenting. Yet we can create one as we go. We can create one as we go. And so with that being the case, it's up to us to really, first thing we can do is say, to remember when we were children. Can we just take a moment and remember what it was like when we were children? And by remembering, that gives us the opportunity to be able to say, to adapt, to adjust, and to understand that our parents didn't have it all. And that's a lot of work within itself. Like, that's some healing. That's some intentionality. That is some, you're really being required to be introspective. Like, to understand that our parents did the best that they could do with the information that they had. They didn't have all the information. And so by doing so, now that helps us to become more relatable to our children. As a young parent, I see Todd come in the room. I'm bringing him on too on this. As a young parent, we're really out there because we have no life experiences. And most of the decisions we're making are from a space of trauma anyways. Or trauma or judgment. We're trying to say, well, we can do it better than our parents do. So now, without even understanding the parameters that our parents are operating with, without understanding the background and all the information that our parents have access to, we think we can do it better because of our own trauma. And so now, many times, as a young parent, we're overcompensating. We're overcompensating for our children. And so, and we got Shaman Tamika's in the room too. We got a couple of people in the room who want to continue to engage this conversation. Let's do it. All right, I'm gonna bring Todd on first. Hey, Todd, man. Good evening to you, my brother. I can't hear you. Got you muted. Let's see. Oh, I have you muted. You're muted now. Oh, I can't unmute you. You have to unmute yourself.
There we go.
There we go. How you doing, man?
I'm good, buddy. How are you, Sameon?
Fantastic, man. I appreciate you in our conversation earlier.
Just a lot of. So
you broke up?
I'm getting a lot of feedback. It's coming through twice, so it'll play through and then it'll. Yep.
So I'll tell you exactly what's happening. Close your YouTube.
Close YouTube.
Or mute your YouTube. Mute your YouTube, because you're in the street in the back room, and so you're getting it twice. I think there's a 30-second gap too.
There we go.
All right.
See, that's what happens when you don't understand technology. Speaking of kids, I don't have mine here to help me out with it, so that's why I'm struggling.
Yeah, man. It's like everything is a learning experience, right? And what we do with it. Do we jump out there in the pond, as we spoke about earlier, to make the mistakes, and so we can learn from it, or we just sit back and be afraid to make mistakes? And so I want to pose that question to you, but at the same time, give me a moment. Let me bring up Shaman Tamika's as well. She's in the back room as well. Shaman Tamika's, you're in with us. How are you doing this evening?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Doing fantastic. Thanks for joining the stream. I'm sure both of you have some contributions that you would like to make. But before you go forth, I want to just give you the opportunity to answer this question. And you posed a great question earlier too. This is also Almaro's Blessings. Do you think the parenting style is different from those who are parents young versus those who are older. I'd like to give you guys, what do you think, Sharma Tamika, since you're the one that introduced the question, and Todd, I'd like to get you to follow up to that.
The reason why I posed that question is because what I'm finding a lot of is that those that had parents young, had their children young between the ages of 18 to 25. What I see in the work that I do, those that started young, they're more like friends with their children. There's not a um like, okay, you're the child, I'm the parent kind of thing, but it's more like a best friend type of thing. So when it's time to um provide discipline to the child, they don't know the difference. Are they playing with me because they're my friend, or are they really acting as my parent right now? Versus those that have had children older, where I see a lot of parents that having their children like in the late 30s, right? Like 35 to 40. I also see, depending on how they were raised also, or sometimes some parents mimic how their parents raised them.
Mm-hmm.
But because of the society that we live in, because I grew up where my mom was young when she had me. So when it came down to discipline, she opposed the same discipline as her mother opposed on her. And so
Mm.
me being a parent and being
Learned behaviors.
starting out, yeah, the behavior. So me being a young parent, what I did was I learned from my mother to not discipline my children the way she disciplined me, because I think it's about understanding first. Like, okay, if the child got in trouble at school, let's listen to both parties and to see how we can discipline depending on the act of what took place. I guess that's what I'm thinking about the yes. So just thinking about how the parenting styles are different back then versus now. Does it depend on how youthful the person is?
Fantastic. Todd, what do you have to lend to the conversation, my friend?
I, I think it was an awesome question, actually. I was on the back. Thanks for including the 25-year-olds, because I was on the back side of that. I had my children when I was 20, my first when I was 25, and I couldn't agree more. We are a lot more in that friendship style with the kids. Now we are disciplinarians. The interesting part of that is, as you talk about it, I find it very interesting because we have a harder time following through on those disciplines, right? Taking
Mm-hmm.
away phones, taking away whatever it might be, letting it fly for a little bit. You transpose your anger, and the difference between right and wrong, right? But you never follow through with that discipline, and we fall into that. Now my kids are actually a fair amount older already. They're one's going to be 16 next week, and
Oh
another's going to be
wow.
20 this summer. Um, but I feel that they are fully functioning. One's a fully functioning adult and doing very well and makes good decisions. My 16-year-old, I feel, is very similar in that case. So I like to think we did something right, but at the end of the day, that you're 100% accurate. It's very, I do see that. My brother actually had his kids a little bit later in life when they were around 40 years old, and they carry through on those disciplines so much more than we ever did.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't think at that age, between 25 and 30, when you're really disciplining your children at that, informative age, they're so cute, right? It's harder to follow through on those disciplines. So I think it's a great question on that piece. How do you feel about the older, I shouldn't say the older parents, but the more seasoned parents later
Right.
in life having their kids? I hate using the term helicopter parents, but really hovering it. Now they do enact the discipline for their kids acting out, but do they take their kids as the benefit of the doubt right away and blame everybody else more quickly than the younger parents did? Now, because I see that a little bit more formative, or not formative, but a little bit more active in what I see. It's the blame is always passed on a little bit easier. for the parents that had their children later in life. And that's a wide generalization, of course.
Right. And I one for one was operating both spaces. I had my first son when I was 20, and so, but I think I'm a little different, and I do agree that there is some learned behaviors that assimilate by way of our parenting, right? There we do learn from our parents on how to be parents just by watching them. So we do adapt some things that they had, and we also release some behaviors that they exhibited with us because it's like, no, I'm not going to do that to my child. That could be hazardous. Yet, so I was 20. I had my son when I was 20, which was interesting because there was a three generation period where we had our children at 20. My grandfather had my father at 20. My father had me at 20, and I had my son at 20. But I made him promise that he wouldn't continue that trait. I wanted him to be able to understand what it meant to be financially viable, to be more secure, more stable, and to be able to provide for his children without struggle, and actually have a better sense of himself before he had children, so that he had more to contribute to those children without having to he had more information he could contribute to those children without having to just try to figure it out. He had an understanding of who he was, and he could stand in that space with confidence. And even as an older parent, when you're making that contribution, you have more time. Like, you're not trying to figure life out as much in your 30s and 40s. You're more grounded. You have an understanding of what it is that you desire to see happen in your life. You're thinking about what contributions financially you're making to your retirement. You're figuring out, you have a better understanding of where you want to live at. You may have even purchased your own house, or you're in the process of being able to purchase a house. So you created a foundation instead of doing it in reverse. You have the house built on without a foundation. Stilts, and then these floods and these tidal waves coming to you, and you're being knocked and rocked, and it's like, wait a minute, this is not feeling good. And so now you try to adjust to the waves instead of just being fermented and having that strong platform that you can stand on and say, okay, you know what, I'm not going to let this shake me. I can stand in this weather, I can stand in this storm being unmoved, and make rational decisions, not by flying by the seat of my pants. What do you guys think about that? 1 second. I actually muted some Tamika's. What do you think about that?
I think
come back to you.
Come back to me.
All right, Todd. How about you? What do you think about that?
Well, thanks a lot, Tamika. Now I have to hop in, right? I agree with that. I mean, the funny part is I've seen both sides of that. I've actually said how my wife and I had our kids in our mid-20s, and although we were financially secure and we'd actually had purchased a house before we had our daughter, we had a good foundation there, but our incomes were growing, and it was one of those, we hadn't experienced life yet. It was not to the point that you'd like to, and have those experiences in that maturity levels. So you're experiencing that with your children, which I think offers some benefit there, because they see you grow, and they're able to see, kids are sponges, right? So they see how you're able to handle situations, and I think we handled it well. Again, I think our kids are very
Adjusted.
In tune, well adjusted. There you go. Thank you for that. But then on my brother's side, they were much different. They're in their 40s. They had built a couple of houses at that point. Really built a really nice life for themselves, and already had that maturity levels that were much different. So how they handle situations is going to be much different because their life experiences are different. Now, their kids are fantastic. You had mentioned being a godfather. One of their children is my godson. He's a fantastic young man in 8th grade, well-adjusted, well-rounded. And I think, the differences between our children and how they were raised, it was completely different levels, right? They were completely different situations. But the end result, in essence, was fairly similar, which is, I guess, good, because in that case, both both families, both kids, all 4 kids are well-adjusted human beings, and they're being good community partners. So is there a right and wrong? You tell me. I don't know.
And I don't think it's about the right and wrong. I think it's more about what's best for each scenario, right?
Yeah.
If I would think about it, well, I actually can think about it because I'm a parent in my 40s. So I'm a parent of teenagers in my 40s. I'm 40, I'll be 49 next month, and I have a 16 and a 14-year-old. I can parent them better. I can parent them. Can make different decisions from them and be proactive parent. I can be a more proactive parent in my 40s, 50s than I could be in my 20s, in my 30s. I often say that my son is my best friend. I'm dad first, but he was my best friend because that relationship allowed me to really grow. We grew together. He's 29 now, and when people see us, they say, "Is that your little brother?" But I'm still dad to him, but we have this relationship that is one of respect, but yet I made a lot of mistakes. But as I was making mistakes, I was also taking personal responsibility of those mistakes and teaching him as I was learning. I was teaching him. So that brings me to my next question. And I didn't forget about you, Sameon Crumby, but I meant to ask this question initially, and I've been holding on to it. So let me get it out there. What's your perceptions on the philosophy of mistakes? Sameon Crumby, you can share with that in conjunction with your first answer, or you can just omit the first answer and just go to this one. It's up to you.
I like the philosophy. Let's do that. The philosophy. I want to put this in a good word. I want to be very careful what I'm saying here.
Why are you afraid to make
I
a
listen
mistake?
to, no, I believe that mistakes are learned lessons, because how we grew up watching our parents discipline us. I think what happened was back then is that a child never got a chance to tell their side of the story. We did more like, it was more like we didn't give the space for a child to vent, to talk about what happened. And I think of things is like to address what happened, take ownership in what happened, and then move to how we discipline based off the action of what happened. Um, the mistake is we don't give space for a child to express themselves enough. I think we're too quick to jump to, oh, you did this, so you're going to be punished for it. But let's see what. And I had I can use an example. My daughter one time. My daughter was 14, and I was the kind of parent that always showed up to the school unannounced. They never knew I was coming, because usually when you're coming, they be on their best behavior, right? So I walked up to the school and I saw her in the hallway. She was not in class. She was walking in the hallway. And I said, "Mom," I said, "aren't you supposed to be in math? So why are you in the hallway?" "Because the teacher is boring." I said, "Does that give you an excuse to cut class?" So it's kind of like I kind of put it back in her lap, and for her to recognize what.
We lost you. Oops. Well, Wi-Fi would do that. Technology does that sometimes. It drops out on us. I'll let you pick up while she comes back in. Todd, what is your philosophy concerning mistakes?
We talked about that a little bit this morning. I agree with her in the fact that, letting them make mistakes is huge. And what the difference is when I grew up, you always said, well, what'd you learn from that? That's all you heard. What'd you learn from that? And you put it back in, but we never answered. That was the difference. You never answered because you just, yeah, I learned from it, and that was it. Because if you kind of made points behind it, or they thought you were being snarky, or they thought you were trying to play it off, in my mind, you just knew to shut up, right? You knew not to kind of play it ahead. Where now it's more along the lines that when you do it, you can talk through their mistakes. Well, where did you go wrong? That's where, when you talk about sharing the feelings now, when the avenue is so much more open, and we do have those, and that's the benefit of having kids, I guess. When you're younger, is they are more friends, they share more with us, and I fully appreciate that, because then you can talk about those mistakes and share it and work through them, and I've never been good at that. I like to think over the last couple of years we've gotten a little bit better. Both my wife and I gotten a little bit better with those types of things, being able to have those conversations with the girls and really kind of working through them. So I think, learning from the mistakes is huge, but understanding why the mistakes were made and actually how to correct them is a big step forward.
I agree with you. I'm the same way. I believe mistakes are an opportunity for you to grow. Like, if you're not making mistakes, then you're not taking the risk to expand your consciousness, to expand yourself. Not even just from a child's perspective, but as a parent's perspective. The reason I asked that question was I was teaching my son through my mistakes as a father. I was teaching him and taking ownership of my mistakes and being vulnerable with him about my mistakes. What I was sharing with him, I apologize for not showing up for you in this way, or I apologize for making that decision. And what I was doing was teaching him ownership. I was teaching him personal responsibility. And that's going to be one of my other questions coming up soon. But I was helping him to understand. And his mother didn't understand. She's like, why are you telling him this? And why are you doing this? Because I want him to understand that there's value in making mistakes. Like, you grow from them. That's the only way you can grow, become better, and be more self-aware, is by making mistakes. Sometimes we think that, it's a failure, it's a loss, but I'm often sharing that we have to let go of the need to be judgmental of ourselves, to be highly critical of ourselves and society as a whole. Because if it's not for the experiences that we encounter, do we get the opportunity to make decisions to be better? I'm gonna say that again. If it's not for the experiences that we encounter, whether it's on our daily journey or through exposure to other people's experiences, do we get the opportunity to have contrast, which allows us to be better? And there's a comment here that I want to share from Ebony. Let's see if I can get it on the screen. It says, I don't feel like there's a right or wrong. We parent from where we are at the time. We all learn and grow, and sometimes we grow together. I have made many mistakes, and when I learn, I know better. I do better. I've made many mistakes, and when I learn and know better, I do better. I believe in issuing apologies and owning my faults, and from that point, doing better going forward. And I totally agree with you, Ebony. And as a matter of fact, I think that's how we create children that are very responsive, that are very acclimated to society, that can go out and thrive better in society, due to the fact that they know that it's just about adjustments. And I'm going to toss this back to Todd in just a moment. I was parenting a young lady who's now 25. She's not my birth child. She was my wife's firstborn, but I knew her when she was in the womb. And one of the things that in her early part of life, she changed schools a number of times, and it was frustrating for her. And I sat her down and I said, let me give you a different perspective. And if you can grab onto this, I want you to hold on to this for the rest of your life. This is what a 30-year-old parent does. This is the 30-year-old me. This is the 30-something-year-old me. This was he did versus what I probably would have did in the 20-year-old. Felt sorry, very empathetic, try to change it, so on and so forth. But I used it as a learning tool. And I think as we as parents, if we can understand that when our child makes a mistake, if we can use it as an opportunity, as a teaching lesson, if we can truly become their first teachers, they'll be better for it. And so when we had that conversation and I shared with her, I said, you know what the biggest and the most hardest lesson for adults to master? And she said, what's that? I said, the adaptability to change. We have a very hard time with change. But if we were able to change more easily, we would be able to realize opportunities more frequently and a better rate, which will allow us to be able to heighten our level of success without going through all the anxieties, the frustrations, the fears, the illusions, so on and so forth. So that was just an example of who I was, the difference between my 20s as a parent versus my 30s. I throw it back to you, Todd. What do you think about that? You're muted.
I absolutely, I appreciate Ebony's comment. So thank you, Ebony, for sharing that. I I didn't learn early on in my career that it was easier to accept, not change, but accept things that I had made mistakes on. If there was something screwed up, I was always pushing it off. Probably for the first 3, 4, 5 years, and that's definitely something over the last in Sameon, from our dealings in the past, it's just always something to take on if I've made any mistakes, or if, my company or business or whatever it does makes mistakes, you got to own those and move forward. And so you try to instill those in your children as well, because when you do that, people respect you so much more. If you own up to your mistakes and then you fix them and make yourself a better person because of those mistakes, that's the only way you do better yourself. I agree with that 100%, and instilling that into the children. Now, whether or not they take that with a grain of salt is a different. If they take that and run with it, they don't always do that, right? I'm always bringing up, don't do this because here's what I did. Well, Dad, that was, in the early 1900s. You don't know what you're talking about, but I always bring that up. Learn from what I didn't know in my early 20s. If you accept those mistakes as being an opportunity to better yourself, move forward, and show people that, you can be respected, you can be trusted. And I think that's widely important. So thank you so much for that share, Ebony.
Absolutely, Ebony. Thank you for sharing as well. See, Simon Tamikas is back. Let's bring her back into the stream. Simon Tamikas, you're back with us. What would you like to add to that conversation, to this conversation, portion of the conversation? Simon Tamikas? You're muted. Okay, maybe she's still having some technical difficulties. Let me know when you're reconnected. All right. So another question that came up, another idea that I have, and I want to throw this against you, Todd, is we talked about this earlier. Are we living in a softer society? And I know neither one of us like to use that word softer, right? It's like it could be a word of taboo. Oh, you're so soft. None of us want to be called or labeled as soft, but at the same time, that's a phrase that society is using. What do you think, especially when it concerns our level of parenting and it concerns our children? Do you feel like that we are in a softer society?
That's a loaded question. Loaded question, Sameon. I would say we are and we're not. I mean, it's both. The cynic in me would say yes, just strictly because of what I was talking about before. I don't carry through on a lot of the disciplinary actions for my children, because how will that affect them? We were brought up to, when you're talking about your feelings, if something happened with my parents, you just didn't discuss it out in the open, right? You didn't discuss mental illness. You didn't discuss mental health. You didn't discuss that stuff. It was almost shameful to do it. So does that make us a softer society? Absolutely not. As we were discussing earlier, that's where the disconnect is with between soft and hard. I mean, back at that point, it was just a hard love, right? I mean, they taught you something with, with a disciplinary action, getting whooped on the ass, pardon my French. If something happened, that's what happened, right? But now, they consider it being a softer society because everybody's talking about this now. Then it delves into a whole different thing. I mean, to what level is it acceptable? When we're taking things and making excuses, I'm going to take a mental health day. I own a couple of restaurants in my past, Sameon, when I was having, maybe a server that would come in at 19 years old and she was in her third week of work and she had to take a mental health day. At some points you're like, well, what is that? You worked 20 hours last week, so a mental health day, it means something different to everybody else. Right. So am I going to think that that's being soft? Absolutely. But again, I was brought up in a different era. Right. So, again, it's a loaded question. You try to understand. And I feel like I always, my partner at the time, he wouldn't have any dealings with that. He just didn't want parts of that. Right. It was more not that he didn't want to deal with it, but he wanted that hard action. Right. He was like, they're just soft. They're not showing up. When I would dive in and say, okay, well, what's the problem? How can we fix it? Because it is important to uncover that. But that didn't mean I didn't think they were a little soft. You know what I'm saying? So now that's just one example. I do think that there's a lot of openness in the world that we live in today that brings that softer side to it, to the conversation. I think I like the way you put it. It's more heart centric, right? You want more love put out in the world. You want those conversations to be had. You want so people actually understand where their feelings are coming from. Because if they have that understanding, they're going to succeed better as an adult, better as a child, better as a student, better as an employee. Doesn't matter what they do. If they understand where their feelings are coming from, they're going to win. So I think that's, again, that's where the difference is. Calling it a softer society isn't necessarily correct. I like the fact that you put it at heart centric because it's hugely important. But we have to draw that line someplace. That's the hard question.
And let me ask you this. Who are the leading contributors to the conversation about it being a softer society? Because I think perspective matters. Who do you think is leading that conversation?
I couldn't even begin to answer that. I do think, you're probably your kids someplace in that, anywhere from, middle school on up to maybe mid-20s, they're pushing those conversations further along to the people that have the experience like we do. We'll call us experienced, not older people. We'll call us experienced, right? They push
seasoned
us
folks.
Seasoned folks. Yes. Thank you. I think they push us to those levels because we have to have an understanding. We have to start being able to get touched with them or get in touch with their feelings and understand where they're coming from in order to make it work, right? On every level, coming home with your kids, dealing with employees, dealing with coworkers. You see all the memes nowadays that say, be nice to everybody because you never know what they're going through at that given moment. And I absolutely try to live that in my everyday life. And it's difficult sometimes. Right. So I think it is driven by the younger generation, making us trying to figure out what's going to be acceptable and how we have to deal with them. And like, there you go with your previous comments, we are not acceptable to change, right?
Yeah.
We don't want to change because we're in winter, but we have to, because we have to understand where they're coming from and we have to get in touch with their feelings.
Yeah, and absolutely. And And I think you answered the question in reverse. The idea of us becoming more vulnerable is coming from, are you saying the idea for us to become more vulnerable is coming from the more youthful generation, the younger generations
I think
versus,
so.
yeah. And I agree with you, absolutely agree with that. And I think it's the older generations. And I think we're stuck in the middle of that conversation, really. The older generations are saying, no, toughen up, get some backbone about yourself, get some thick skin. And there is some credibility to that. But at the same time, I think there's this push and pull from the space of saying, no, I don't want to become more emotionally mature. I don't want to operate in your space of vulnerability. I'm comfortable where I am. I think that's fair. But at the same time, I think that it also creates a disconnect. Like, how can you truly operate in the space of understanding if you're not being understanding? If you're not unveiling yourself to understanding beyond or getting a different perspective beyond your own. Ebony made a great, and I'm gonna bring you in just a moment, Summer, to me, because I see you're back. But and I totally agree with you, Todd. You knocked it out the park. Thank you. Ebony also said, she says, whoa, that is loaded. In my opinion, we are not necessarily in a softer society, but more so one that is more open and aware. Some people are not comfortable with that. We're forever evolving, and it is necessary. And I totally agree with that. That's a great comment, Ebony. I totally agree with that. And there is a part of our society that likes things as the status quo. It's comfortable for them. As a matter of fact, they find themselves in a more favorable position. They don't have to be to answer questions that they don't want to answer. They don't have to be a part of conversations or experiences that they feel comfortable with. But even in your discomfort is a treasure trove of information, a treasure trove of opportunities that exist there. It's just a matter of you wanting to go there. Matter of fact, it brings me to a statement that my uncle, who's he's a generation ahead of me, barely. Yeah, he's in his 60s. He's in his 60s. So he's about 14 years older than me, 15 years older than I. And he says something to me all the time. He says, there you go. Always going into the rabbit hole. And I corrected him one time. I said, well, they said the egg that the rabbit has a golden egg that's full of treasure. So what, you think that's going to be above ground? I said, no, it's going to be in that rabbit hole. Now your wisdom comes in. If you send something, you don't just reach into the hole without knowing what's down there. So wisdom will tell you, this is the difference between my 40-year-old brain and my 20-year-old brain. My 20-year-old brain will say, oh, let me go get the treasure. My 40-year-old brain says, let me send something down there to make sure it's not a booby trap. And if it comes back, then I'll reach in and grab it. Because you never know what's down there. It could be a snake. Just wait for you to come down there and then strike your butt. Because they like eggs too. And so it's just understanding, allowing yourself to grow and mature, and to be more available to information and to experiences which allow you to grow and live a life of that is, I like to think a life that is happier. More transparent life is a life that gives you more peace and happiness. But I'll let you guys contribute to that. Simon Tamika's, welcome back. Welcome back. We don't hear you. Unmute yourself. She says she's back. She says she's back, but let's see here. All right. Well, let's go over to you, Todd, until something's not right. So we'll figure it out as we go. What do you think? Because I know that you and I are approximately, we're coming from the same generation, if I'm not mistaken. We're 70 babies, right?
Yep, I'm 46. Yep.
Oh, you're a baby.
You're
my little brother.
Sameon. What are you talking about? What are you talking about? But you have nicer hair.
Hey, man. Hey, in some places. I'm working on it. I'm training to get back.
All right, nice.
But yeah, we, in the space, we've talked, and we were talking about mental health. And like you said before, we don't, especially our generation and our parents, um, especially our parents, they don't understand. Many of them would say, "Well, just pray through it, just toughen up." We all have some difficult times. Um, we all have we all have some frustrations. We all have some, we all go through some things. Everybody goes through some things. Um, just Oh, you know what? I stand corrected. I know why Tamika is not being heard. I haven't brought her in the stream. There she goes. She's in the stream now. But we all technical difficulties. Thank you for the correction. Um, but we all they think that we can just pray our way out of it. Just like therapy. Like many people don't think that therapy is a good thing, and they choose not to prescribe to it or subscribe to therapy. When it's nice sometimes to have a conversation with someone who can provide you with a perspective outside of your known situation, outside of what you're actually being attached or entangled with. So, Todd, what do you think? What do you think about that? Just with the mental health capacity, especially when we talked about the suicide numbers earlier.
Yeah, in fact, I didn't catch the question there. What do you want me to comment on? I'm going to have to jump out pretty quick here, Sameon, because I got to get my daughter to soccer, but I didn't catch the question.
The question was about the perspective about mental health.
Oh.
You mentioned earlier how mental health is a difficult conversation, and I totally understand that. And I've gone through that for the last couple of years with my children, and being more available, taking more accountability, even for stuff that I may not have felt like it was necessarily my fault. But just hearing them, owning it, and letting their voice and their feelings matter. What do you think about the disparity between our generation and our parents versus the mental health disparity between those two generations or three generations?
Oh yeah, I mean it's significant, right? I mean, like I had said a little bit earlier, mental health just wasn't something you talked about. When I was growing up, those just weren't conversations. If you had that crazy uncle, which I am the crazy uncle, which is kind of crazy, but
Me too.
you never talked about those things. If there were private matters and they were kept private. And I think, the benefit of all this mental health talk now is that it's becoming healthier to have those discussions. And when it comes into play, I mean, even people our age and the younger people can get those out in the air, get them off their chest, so they're not in their mind all the time. And I think it's a huge focus. Where that was with our parents, it just wasn't available. We just didn't have that. It wasn't even, I think I could have had those conversations with my mom and dad, which is crazy, right? I could have had those conversations, and I think we could have had talked about a lot of different things. It was just felt like it was uncomfortable because it wasn't in the focus like it is now. So I'm extremely happy that it's in the focus now. And I think it adds to the relationships that we're able to bring with our children and our friends and our peers and everybody, our age and moving forward. And I'm kind of excited about that because I think as we learn more about it, the mental health, as we build on that, I think it'll just get stronger. It's just such a new phenomenon, if you will, that it's only been alive for maybe 3-5 years, right? That mental health is something that we can actually talk about. Maybe a little bit longer, but it's really become prominent recently. And as we all get more comfortable in it, I think as a society, it's going to be more acceptable and easier to talk about. And I think you're going to start to see that switch with our kids and then their kids, and things will just get better along those lines. But,
I totally agree. And Todd, I appreciate you for being with us, man. Tuning in. I hope that you come back and join us again, man. It's great to have you, my guy.
I will. Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure talking with all you guys. So thank you so much. Enjoy your night.
Enjoy soccer practice.
It's cold. I will.
I know. I have it tomorrow. I have a game. We have a game tomorrow.
Good luck. Good luck to you.
All right. Talk to you soon, my friend.
See you, Sam, man.
Shaman Tamikas.
Hello. Hello.
Hello. You've missed so much. We haven't been able to get feedback from you on so much. Just feel free to add to the conversation.
It was great to listen though when I finally got everything up and running. I enjoyed the conversation. I really did, and it was a lot of great points. Ebony made, Todd made, as well as yourself, and you all said everything that I would want to say. In addition to that, everything that you all have said is the about being heart centered parenting, or they call it now attachment parenting. That's a new word they call it now, attachment parenting. Whereas how to discipline a child without physical punishment. And like I said before, addressing the situation, accountability, right? And then and then you tell me how you think you should be. You tell me what you think. And my children have literally said, okay, mom, take my phone. Take my phone, um or I know I want to go this place, so I tell you what, I won't go there for like a couple of weeks. Like they start punishing themselves. And I made it a way that when we how we grew up, I guess because I saw my cousins get into so much trouble that I did everything that I could to not get in trouble. So I was one of
Mhm.
those obedient children because I saw all of them getting whooped all the time and getting the belt and stuff. I'm just like, wait a second, but I didn't do anything. And then being the oldest, I'm the oldest of four. I'm the only girl and I have four brothers. And I was a parent before I was a parent. So it's like I had to partake in taking my brothers to school, all those things. So I look at that too. So because there's a lot of in our generation, when we grew up, if we were the oldest, it's like we had to take on responsibilities as parents. So I wanted my children to not have that same mistake that not living their life as kids.
Right, right. Yeah, and it's interesting too because you said something which actually led into my next question.
Okay.
The question is, uh, when should parents introduce personal accountability, and how?
Mm.
When should parents introduce personal accountability, and how? What do you think about that?
I think I think the accountability should happen before it happens. Like
Well,
if
let me preface that question
okay.
before you answer it, before you go any further. I think people need to know, what is your background, because you're gonna give a perspective that not only as a parent, but also from having an interesting background. So to give people an understanding of what your background is, so that they can um, really
Okay.
grasp your perspective.
Okay. Are you saying background is like when I was growing up background?
No, your profession. You
My
can give
profession?
your profession more than anything.
Okay. Well, my profession is I'm a midwife. And so I help heal communities, not just families in birthing, but also families that are sick or those that are in transition. That is my background. Um, from a person at a very young age, working in what I do, because I caught my first baby when I was 10 years old, um, and watching how children come into the world. That's another thing I kind of thought about that too. I said, okay, well, if a baby came in the world in love, right, and nourished, they tend to have a very great life. But I do know that those that have come into the world in different environments, maybe maybe I'm dealing with someone that didn't even really want to be pregnant. The pregnancies are unplanned, but they couldn't have an abortion, so they chose to have the child. And when they have the child, I noticed that the child was treated different. They was disciplined different. Um, which is unfair. And what I notice in those situations, the child end up becomes feeling abandoned. The child tends to feel not loved. And so what they do is the child will literally get into trouble just so they can get the attention that they need or to get the love that they need. And so a lot of times when I saw that happening in certain situations, I would say, you know what, maybe just the child is doing that because the child wants to be loved. The child wants some attention. So if they feel like they have to do this to get it, then they're going to keep doing it until we get it. But they're pretty much saying, hey, I want to be loved. I want to be heard. I want to be supported.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the reason I wanted you to give your background is because you are there during the gestation period,
Correct.
and you begin to see the maturation of the child. Not only the child, but you begin to see people who haven't been a parent
Mm-hmm.
learning how to become a parent.
Learn how to become a parent.
As Ebony said, I can relate with being a parent before you were a parent.
Right.
So understanding that role, the maturation of growing into the role or the identity of becoming a parent.
Correct.
And that parent, when do you, as a midwife, as a professional in that space, because not only are you there through the gestation process, but you're also there through the through when they enter into this world. You're also there when, and we'll have another segment that's going to be that allow us to really get in depth with regards to this space. But I just want to just set it up with a generality.
Okay.
Uh, but you're there when they enter into this world. You're there from the postnatal perspective, postpartum perspective. You're there
Mm-hmm.
and see these children grow and to become into their own identity or struggle with accepting the identity that has been placed upon them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really wanted you to set it. I wanted to set you up from that perspective so that people can hear from you what you see in that space as parents,
Oh
um,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
and you being a young parent yourself who had your first child at the age of 17,
Yes.
um, and your last child at the age of 25. So you all your children within that span of what we say that early span of we really don't even know who we are.
Right.
And so trying to parent in a space of not even understanding who you are and helping these lives to understand who they are becoming,
Correct.
or what they have to contribute to society or to their family, so on and so forth. So
Mm-hmm.
let me go ahead and add to that.
Yes, I believe that how a child is raised in the world, it starts with conception. Um, Being a mother starts at conception because you're already nurturing this child, even though it's not physically out of your body yet. It's like a plant. You want to pour into that plant. You want to love into that plant. Talk to that plant so it can grow. You're doing the same thing as a mother. When you're expecting, I always tell clients, like, take time to talk with your child. Your child do talk back. They talk back with kicks or movement. Um, if you're giving that child love already in your womb, you're loving yourself, you're being supported by family and community, that child will know what it's coming into. So when you finally give birth to this child and you're here, there's a transition adjustment that has taken place now because the baby is no longer in your body. The baby is out of your body. And then I get a lot of parents say, I really got to nurse this baby. Yes, you have to feed it. Yes, you have to clothe it. And it's about taking care of someone else outside of yourself in modern day parenting versus back in the day when you was pregnant. Everyone came to you, nourished you and loved on, because they know if you're nourished and loved on, the baby get that same energy. And guess what, the community is also there to help raise the child because it takes a village.
Absolutely. And you said something earlier. You said upon conception is when a mother becomes a mother. It's not
Yes.
when the baby is delivered.
Correct.
However, I want to add to that. Upon conception is when a father becomes a father. A man
That's
becomes a
correct.
father.
That's
It
right.
doesn't happen after you becoming a father doesn't happen after you you the baby's actually delivered.
That's
And
right.
and I'll say this, and I'll say this. Who you are while that baby is in the womb
Mm-hmm.
is highly potential, highly possible of who you will be once they arrive.
That's right.
Because it's very difficult to make that shift from being present, from not being present prior to their arrival to being present when they arrive. It's like this. It seems like there's a catching up process that you have to do. Like you have
It
to catch
is.
up. Like you haven't. Like, is that what your experience has been?
That's what, yeah, most definitely. It's like it's not really valid until the child is out. And I get a lot of fathers say that. Like there's some dads that they're not connected to the process at all. I get a lot of that. And then like once the baby is out, and I heard one father tell me, I really didn't believe it. Even though I saw her belly growing, it just didn't process to me until the baby was actually out.
It becomes real. Yeah.
So it to him, it became real at that moment.
I call those people evidence-based individuals. Like
Yes.
they need, like, it has to be tangible for them to be responsive.
Right.
And then what now you and what it appears to me, now you're using all this time and energy to try to create a connection that should have been created the entire time.
That's correct.
And then I find that a lot of, just being a transformational leader, a coach, and really, and as I stated earlier, One Transformation Center, our focus is we're celebrating humanity, one, but we're also doing that by transformation, by transforming lives and relationships through inspiration, motivation, and healing.
That's right. Yes.
And so that really is how you're also going to create the core dynamics of the family. We're having these conversations so that we can have stronger family cores, family dynamic, community cores, community dynamics that would allow our children to be in a space of feeling greater support. And what I heard you mention is that support isn't there from conception.
Yes.
It's a process that more times than none that women are walking through by themselves, doing even though their partners may be there physically, they're not present.
That's right.
And that happens too that happens on the other side too. More, it's very common. I can tell you from personal experience that my oldest child, when she was in the womb, that I was more present with her than her mother was, who was carrying her, who felt her movement, she was depending on her body to be nurtured. But her mother was depending on me to nurture her in order for our daughter to be nurtured. So there was an indirect nurturing that our daughter received from me, as well as by way of how I cared for her mother, even though her mother wasn't connecting to that experience because she wasn't ready to be a parent.
I was just about to say she must not be ready to be a parent. Usually when they're not, they do disconnect from the experience. Yes.
Absolutely. And so I find that the children who are the most valuable are those who are nurtured early in the womb. That's right. Regardless if the parents are married or they made the decision to co-parent in the same environment.
Correct.
As long as that co-parenting begins in the womb, that child is very valuable and have a strong sense of self. Yes. Not to say that you don't have children who come out and just are resilient. There are children who come out and just are super resilient, and that regardless of their circumstances and situations, they do not allow that to be their identity. There are those. I call them old souls.
Yeah, they're very old souls because they have a plan. They already know they're not going to let no one stop them from their plan, and they're going to keep going regardless. Yes.
Absolutely. Well, we have about 10 more minutes left on the stream. So, I want to give everybody an opportunity to be able to make a comment, to be able to share, whether you're in the chat. But also, I want to take a moment to request that you like, share, and subscribe to One Transformation Center's YouTube page, that you go and like wherever it is wherever it is that you're receiving the stream from, whether it's Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, that you would like it and share it with someone. So even if they don't listen to the live conversation, that they can go back and replay it at their leisure. And if you're listening to it on the replay, I appreciate you liking it, loving it, sharing it. Smash that like button, share it, and subscribe to receive more updates like these, more conversations like these, because we are live. We're live every Wednesday night for the Transformative Conversation, every Sunday night for the Transform My Life stream, which we're on a 13-week series called the Magnanimous Manifestation series. But we're breaking down the word manifestation as an acronym. Last week was notate or notation. This week is going to be I. So stay tuned on that. Check that out so you can be aware of that content that's coming. And also every morning at 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, Monday through Friday, and 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on Saturday and Sundays, we have the morning manifestation calls, which are amazing, set you up for the day. So in closing, do you have anything else you'd like to add to this conversation? And I want, well, before you do that, let me address this statement. When should parents introduce personal accountability and how?
Mm-hmm.
I've always introduced personal accountability from day one. Day one. Now, that doesn't mean I have expectations of my children. No, I don't have expectations of my children because they're not young enough to be able to meet your expectations, first and foremost. And those are yours. So anytime you as a parent find yourself disappointed with your child, I ask you to look at yourself and the expectations that you have in those moments. And ask yourself, are you disappointed because that child did something wrong, or are you disappointed because that child did not meet your expectations? And if it's your expectations, that's on you. Do not hold that child hostage to your expectations. Give that child permission to live their best and highest experience, to be the best version of themselves, and to be able to have the freedom to make mistakes. That's where they learn. And that's when you can introduce personal responsibility, personal accountability and responsibility. What I mean by that is, Todd said something earlier. He said that the question was asked of him at a young age. He asked of his children, how do you contribute to that? How did you contribute to this mistake? What could you have done differently? Tamika said it earlier herself. Tamika said it earlier herself. She said she asked her children, she put it back on them. You know, if discipline came out, how do you think we should discipline you? Let them make the decision, because then they cannot hold you as the villain.
That's right.
And nor can they be a victim. So those are great pieces of information. So you can start it out from the beginning. You can speak life into your child when your child is in the womb and remind them of their decision to come here. Like, here's a great point. Here's a great idea for you. Try this. Even in your conversations now at this age that you have these children, because they will push back and blame you for being here. I didn't choose to be here.
Yes,
Really?
you did.
You didn't choose to be here? Because at any given time, you could have said, no, I'm good. I don't want to come. I've seen it happen so many times. No, I'm good. I'm not ready. I'll come back later. I'll come back another time. But you actually, if you put it back on your child and you make a suggestion to your child that you made the decision to be here for a purpose and a plan. So how are you contributing to that purpose and that plan? It's going to make them to think. And the more you make them think, the more you give them freedom and room to think, the more they begin to exercise that muscle that they say doesn't fully develop until they're 18, that helps them with their decision-making process. You're supporting them at an early age to really build that muscle and flex it. Because you know that the brain is the largest muscle in our body. And it needs as much activity and action as possible so that we can be able to really be assets in our liabilities. So, in closing, Simon Tamika, what would you like to share before we depart?
The message for this evening I want to leave on a note of saying that great parenting doesn't come in a book. It's all about learning each other's personalities and how to grow that beautiful child. And I believe that when you grow a child in nourishment and love and community and village, the child can thrive, which leaves room for less mistakes to be making and more accountability firsthand.
Simon Tamika, also take a moment to let people know where they can find you. They can learn more about who you are and what you offer to the world.
Sure, you can find me on Facebook as Shaman Tamikas, name spelled ShamanTomeCas. You can find me on Twitter at Omorose Bless. That's OMOROSEBLESS, all lowercase, one word. That same one on Instagram and TikTok. You can find me there too. And YouTube is Omaros Blessings LLC.
Fantastic, fantastic. Those who didn't hear, Those who have ears, let them hear. Those who have eyes, let them see. Those who desire to be in the know. Because we are here to help you in that space each and every day. So I thank you for taking another moment to invest in your transformation. Another moment to be an asset and not a liability. Another moment to be the change you desire to see. We're grateful that you chose to be with us. And if you'd like to make a contribution, we would gratefully receive it and accept it. You can support us by way of Giveify. Giveify, just simply go and query One Transformation Center and make any donation to help continue to stream and add to us continually providing you this content, these guests, this information to help you with the improvement of your life, to be the asset you desire to be. Or you can go to my Cash App and make a contribution there as well. That's on the screen also. So, again, we thank you for chiming in today. We thank you for your contributions, whether it was directly in the chat, or we thank you for the contributions that you made. Also, there you go. Shaman Tamika's website, amorosblessings.com. Go check it out. Until next time, continue to be the change you desire to see. Be great. We love you and we thank you. See you again soon.